Well, thank you so much, Len, for being here today for the WaveCapital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. And you're my ninth guest on the podcast. And I really appreciate you joining me today. And Len, tell me what relationship building means to you. Everybody has their own definition on relationship building, but what does that term or that phrase mean to you?
Well, I mean, I look at it through different prisms. One, relationship building. As human beings, we all need to stay connected with others. I mean, that's how we survive. That's how we grow. That's how we develop. And so, to provide outreach to people who certainly have compatibilities, people with whom you'd like to learn from, people with whom you can provide input and provide wisdom, knowledge, and understanding to it all makes sense. That's part of the continuum of life. If you're looking from a business standpoint, certainly building relationships opens up new vistas in many ways and creates a chain that people can take advantage of, provided that those relationships are based on honesty, trust, and mutual interest. So, you look at it from both of those standpoints, and certainly they're beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's a great way to open the minds of people who look at relationship building because it's all across so many different platforms and spectrums. And I think that no matter whom you are and what profession you're in, it depends on the accountability and the reliability, the integrity, the honesty, the transparency that you have with you and your, cohorts. And I think that, you being not only a former professional basketball player, a sports play-by-play broadcaster, as well as a trial attorney, talk about all the different realms of professionalism that you've had to, encounter and work in and how it all parallels and overlaps.
Well, I've been pretty fortunate in the experiences that I've had. As you mentioned, well, you can even begin before playing in the NBA as a collegiate as a collegiate athlete and student. It was important to develop relationships, just again for the human need and the survival on a campus. Remember, I came to the University of Maryland from New York City, where I hadn't really traveled outside of my home for most of my life at that period of time. So this was a new experience for me, and in order to get grounded and to be able to grow and develop, but certainly needed to develop relationships not only with my coaches, with teachers, but certainly with my fellow students. And I've had the opportunity to have some lifelong friendships from that moment up until now, and those friendships have paid off both emotionally as well as provided opportunities. And then you move on to the professional ranks where, again, developing relationships in development had a lot to do with, my growth as a human being, not only just as a basketball player. And then we're talking about coaches, we're talking about people who were fans at the time, but ultimately were able to provide more than just essentially hero worship. There's mutual trust and understanding with people, and you learn things that help you grow emotionally as much as you would in any other facet. Afterwards, as a law student at Harvard Law School, again, professional relationships were certainly developed as well as lifelong friendships. And you notice the trend. These individual relationship developments blend over not only into my professional life, but certainly in the private life, because I think that once you've made a connection with a human being, it's more than just exploiting that relationship for professional gain or anything like that. They're human beings, and there's an awful lot to learn from people, a lot to admire in people, and certainly make no mistake about it. You as an individual have to understand your own self-worth and the fact that you can provide many of these things to other folks. So, that's essentially what I've gotten, certainly at law school. And again, professional relationships as well as personal relationships have endured. And throughout, my career as a sportscaster, I've grown to have many good friends that have come out of that industry, people that I can rely on even to today for a varied amount of things. As a teacher now at Columbia University, and as a practicing lawyer prior to that, I've been able to draw on those relationships when certainly needed, not only from an emotional standpoint, not only from a collegial friendship standpoint, but also from a professional standpoint, where I can be of help and assistance, and certainly they can be of help and assistance as well.
That's wonderful. And, what in your childhood growing up, who were your first mentors? Who were your first examples of relationship builders? And talk to me about what made you think of, I love basketball. You became an All-American at the University of Maryland and gone on to have a great professional NBA career as well as a practicing trial attorney. But, what made you decide to go to law school? It begs the question, and later on I'll ask you maybe another question, unless you answer it before I can ask the question. But, what made you think, besides sports, Len Elmore, he could really contribute to society in other ways?
Growing up in New York City, I was a television child, obviously. I watched a lot of TV shows that, during the tumult of the civil rights movement, as well as the anti-war protests, anti-Vietnam War protests. There are a lot of lawyer shows on TV, and I became really attached to shows like Perry Mason and The Defenders and others that were similarly related, because I thought that, through the law, you could have some kind of impact on the social mosaic, if you will. And, I didn't want to necessarily stand on the sidelines and watch the parade go by. I wanted to march in the parade, so to speak. And I never really lost that particular desire and passion. Now, when you talk about, relationships, two of the most influential folks in my life were my mother and my father. My mom was a extremely bright woman and from a small town in Louisiana. Had an opportunity to get a scholarship to go to an HBCU, Southern University, but unfortunately her family was so poor. Instead of going to college, she wound up going to New York to be with my aunt, her sister, to make money to send back home. But she never lost sight of the opportunity that she had, and she wanted her children to get that same opportunity and even better. My father was a high school dropout in New York City, and wound up joining the Army, was in Japan during World War II in the occupational forces, came back to the United States, and worked as a truck driver, but continued to kind of develop himself to the point where he could pass the civil service test and become a city worker, as did my mother, and provide for us a better opportunity moving from the projects to a single family home. And in that home, they finished the basement by hand and built an area called the library, which really was just an alcove that had a bookcase and small desks. But on that bookcase, they went into debt to get encyclopedias and Bible study, and those were the first books that we had in our home. And what that told me at the time was that there's a premium on education, and that without it, there would be no progress. And I took that to heart throughout. Now, of course, growing up, I loved sports. I was a baseball player initially and loved that sport and was pretty good at it. But I kind of grew beyond the dimensions of a really good baseball player and wound up being discovered as a basketball player at my size in junior high school. And, one of the first influential people outside of my home was a gentleman by the name of Howie Evans, who was a writer for the Amsterdam News in New York City, and suggested that I try playing a sport with people my size. At that time, I think in junior high school, I was 5'11", 6'1", in the seventh grade, and really started to grow after that. And that gave me an idea. Okay, maybe I can try this game of basketball. Certainly, I knew nothing about it, and was taken to a high school in Manhattan, a Catholic school, for a tryout. Little beknownst to me that it was a tryout, and not knowing much of the rules of basketball, I just relied on basic physical skill to be able to compete. And that's where I met my high school coach, Jack Cunard, who had a profound impact on me as a person. He was kind, intelligent, sensitive to, the needs, particularly of people of color, simply because, again, he was a basketball coach, but more than anything else, interacted with us as a teacher as well. And, during that time, you had civil unrest in many of the big cities, racially based civil unrest. And he and I would sit and talk after class before games, simply because I lived too far away from home to go home and come back for games. So he and I would have some tremendous discussions on race, on being a man, if you will, and what manhood meant, and so many other things that mentors can have impact upon. So obviously, being recruited at the University of Maryland and other places, one of my mentors was a gentleman by the name of George Raveling, who was an extraordinarily impressive man. Graduate of Villanova University, a pretty good basketball player, a coach, but also there was another side of him. He actually was a kind of a bodyguard for Dr. King during the speech, the I Have a Dream speech, and he in fact still has the written copy of the I Have a Dream speech. Dr. King was going to throw it away, and Coach Raveling grabbed it. But he was a profound impact on me from the standpoint of leadership, and continues to this day, as someone who you can rely on to provide insight into leadership and how to treat people. I mean, I could go on and on with people who have certainly had an impact on my life. And one other person who was relatively inanimate, simply because he was a hero, a figure in history, but I never met him. I just read about him, was Paul Robeson. And Paul Robeson, as many people know, was a human rights activist, a tremendous athlete, All-American in Rutgers University during the early part of the 20th century. Was Phi Beta Kappa valedictorian at Rutgers, and essentially was a pro baseball player, pro football player, a graduate of Columbia University, a concert singer, and an actor. And again, a human rights activist as well. To me, he was a Renaissance man. And when I read about his life, I thought about my ability to do a lot of things. And, to this day, I kind of am grateful that I had an opportunity to be exposed to his life and what he stood for. So, as I said, we can go on and on. There are other people who have impacted me throughout. But the bottom line is, yes, in order to grow, in order to develop, certainly you need people with greater wisdom, greater understanding, greater knowledge than yourself to help shape you and help, motivate you going forward, and, really allow you to take a look at what they've done and to be able to pay it forward.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned so many, notable names in your life, and the fact that one of your mentors was a bodyguard for Dr. Martin Luther King is so remarkable. And I think that, it sounds like whether it was your parents, or sounds like whether it was your mentors, or just people throughout your life have made a significant impact, and they've shaped you for who you are today. And so when you think about, if you could think of any organization, an organization built upon, all the attributes that you would think requires for an organization to be successful, who are the people, and maybe you've already mentioned some of them already, who are the people you'd want to build an organization around with you to lead that organization?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me go back to, Coach George Raveling certainly was at that time, for that particular moment, a Dr. King bodyguard. That wasn't his only vocation. And in fact, he grew beyond that to be a tremendous college basketball coach, a tremendous influence on sports culture as a Nike executive, and now as a writer, a member of the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. So just want to make sure that people understand that he has far more dimension than just being a bodyguard for Dr. King for that moment. But to answer your question, Garrett, there are so many names that I could bring up to a great extent from organizations that you could look up to, but I'd rather have the profile of someone who essentially has a leadership qualities, a sensitivity, that has a vision, that certainly has an empathy for the people that work with him and her or around him or her. And my mentors are not just males. Obviously, there are females who've had a profound impact as well. So that kind of profile, I would take those folks as leaders at any point in time. And again, it really comes down to having a sense of who you are, having, as I said, essentially a true north that grounds you in principle and in ethics. And if those things are existent in an individual, I'm more than willing to sit, listen, and interact.
Yeah, well said. I think also you mentioned a key point, listening, because, leaders, who have a very strong will to lead and to think about how they want to go about doing it and leading others, but you have to be a great listener to know the people around you, the people who work for you or under you, to know what their needs are and to know, what they think it is or are the best course or courses of action. And I think that, you know, listening is such a lost art sometimes, and the key to great listening is also the key to great leadership and to be able to lead an organization. And I think when you think about your time at ESPN, CBS Sports, other organizations you've broadcasted for, talk about some of the relationships, the people that you sat on the desk with, whether in studio or at basketball games, being paired up with. Talk about some of those memories and talk about the relationships that you built during those times of your life.
Well, one of the things that I'd like to really bring out, and I think you alluded to them, was the art of listening. And that's, as a color analyst, that's part of your job, to listen to your play-by-play partner and to be able to react and respond beyond just analyzing the play that's out there. So it requires some practice. And listening takes a lot of patience to be able to absorb before you speak. It's that old saying that better to listen as opposed to speak without understanding and be considered a fool. It's better to listen and to be able to respond and kind of remove the doubt in some way, shape, or form. I'm not sure if I got it right or not, but it's better to listen than to speak out without understanding, is what I'm trying to say. And so, with relationships that I've developed, some of my favorite play-by-play partners have been guys that, I've kind of made history with. Vern Lundquist is one of those who, we broadcast that famous Kentucky Duke game together. And Vern was an absolute untouchable with regard to his ability to detail the action, but not get in the way of the action, and give the play-by-play, the color analyst, room to be able to analyze exactly what went on and explain that to the fans. Another partner of mine, Gus Johnson, he and I were kind of yin and yang. Gus was extraordinarily excitable, and for me, I'd rather take a more logical approach, a more under controlled approach to be able to explain what's going on in a particular play, in a particular game. And I think that we meshed extremely well. And then again, I could talk about so many other guys: Dan Shulman, Mike Tirico. The list pretty much goes on and on. Tim Brando, certainly. So we, over the years, I've been really blessed to have quality play-by-play guys who have given me the room to do what I do. And this is probably my last year in broadcast. I've taken a few games just to, keep the sweet taste of college basketball in my mouth from that standpoint. But, I've been really blessed over 33 years of broadcasting college basketball games. And, I've learned from every partner that I've been fortunate enough to be paired with.
Well, you mentioned Tim Brando, and I'm looking forward to interviewing him on Monday. And, what a great list of people, from Vern Lundquist to Dan Shulman, to others, Mike Tirico, Gus Johnson. I think it's wonderful how many people you've impacted in your life. And I'm sure they can say the same thing about impacting yours, but everybody in such a busy schedule and in such a 24/7 news cycle that we live in, people every day are just focusing on their craft, trying to improve, get better, provide for themselves and their families, build strong relationships around themselves, and make a name for themselves and leave a legacy. And you and others have led a great legacy, whether it's in your professional life and I'm sure in your family life too. Talk a little bit about your family and the relationships that you've built with your family and how that has meant so much to you.
Well, I mean, I am extraordinarily proud of relationship, obviously, that I've had with my wife. We started dating in 1973, and even though my wife pursued her career as a financier on Wall Street and with Bank of America, we stayed together as my parallel of a pursuit of an NBA career. We didn't get married for a lot of reasons. We were both pursuing careers and trying to find ourselves. But ultimately, when I graduated from law school after our 14 years together, we decided to form a union. There are two boys that are the result of that union. One, my oldest son, Stephen, is a Princeton graduate and has a master's from the Citadel. Right now, he's in communications and moving up the ladder extremely well. And my youngest son, Matthew, is a Columbia undergraduate as well as a Columbia Business School graduate. He also has worked in education. He's been a consultant with one of the large consulting companies. But he also began as a teacher in a charter school system in New York City. So I think what we've taught our kids is that while they are very fortunate to be able to experience great educations, great opportunities, that there's also a need to be able to give back. And both of them have been extremely generous with their time and with their effort, recognizing that you can do good and do well. And hopefully, my life and my wife's life have demonstrated that. We're a pretty close-knit family. Our sons, come home to visit pretty regularly. We're close to them as well, and we try to see them at least a couple of times per month. One lives in Washington, D.C., the other lives in New York City. And again, I look at them, that's our legacy. And, I think the legacy is in good hands.
That's great. And it's so nice to hear. It's great to hear how, the guests I've been interviewing, how they speak so, fondly of their family and their children. And it truly is the best legacy to leave the next generation, your kids, grandkids. And, you did a lot of things right when your kids can speak so highly of, his or her parents. And, you talk about your last year broadcasting. What do you have in store for yourself once you retire from broadcasting? Do you have any endeavors, any other ventures that you are planning on pursuing once you call your last game?
Well, I mean, that's only part of what I do. So I still have my teaching responsibilities at Columbia University for a few more years. I'm the co-chair of the Knight Commission for Intercollegiate Athletics. We're a reform-minded group that's been in existence for 30, 40 years. I'm one of the chairpersons of that group as we continue to try to find answers to make college sports what it is, a primary component of education for these young athletes, and help to carve out a space where sports becomes a driver for not only education, but as they continue to play, health, safety, and continued success. Those are some things that I will continue to do, and hopefully find other ventures as well to kind of immerse myself in. Again, it comes down now to trying to give back, for the many benefits and fortunes that I've been able to experience. From opportunities that I've received, it's time to kind of help continue to pay them back. Not that I've ever stopped, and also try to impress upon young people with whom I come in contact, whether it's through the education system, the postgraduate system that I'm involved in at Columbia University, speaking engagements and otherwise, that you can do it all, particularly those who have professional skills. There's a responsibility that they have because of the blessings they've received to be able to give back. But also, you don't have to choose one over the other. You can not only become a professional athlete, but you can also utilize the opportunities that you've had to build and become the best person you can be through education and through interaction with others. And as I said, through empathy, and base your life on principled and an ethical basis, and to be able to pay that forward as well. We're in a continuum. We're in a cycle that we teach and others learn, and in effect, those who learn go forward and teach themselves. And so we stay on that continuum, and hopefully we'll have some success. So I'm not worried about not having anything to do once I stop broadcasting. There'll be plenty.
Well, I figured, as a lecturer at Columbia University, that alone, there's so much you can do in academics, not only teach students, but as you talk about, impacting their lives, mentoring them, what have you noticed as a lecturer at the collegiate level, at the Ivy League level, relationships that you've built, has things changed? And I'm sure it could be a rhetorical question, but everybody might have a different, response in his or her own way. But, growing up, going to school at the University of Maryland, playing in the NBA, being a trial attorney, being a sports play-by-play broadcaster, also being a lecturer, professor, has, in your mind, what has changed and what has stayed the same as you work with the youth now compared to previous generations?
The only thing I can say is for those who are focused on developing themselves in their careers and not dissuaded by the challenges that doing that presents, and who aren't distracted by instant gratification, etc. For all of those, the things that stayed the same is curiosity, a thirst for knowledge and understanding, and a desire to make a difference. I mean, that hasn't changed from the days that I can remember coming up in the 60s and 70s. There are a lot of young people like that, and they're more aware right now of their surroundings, and they're pretty adept at finding solutions, if you will, and seeking them, not necessarily finding them, but in seeking them, they ultimately will find them, particularly if they access the right people. And then finally, the idea that there's so many issues out there that require their activism and activism for positive change. And it's really appreciative. I'm really appreciative of that, because I haven't seen anything like that since, as I said, the time I was a teenager in the 60s.
Last question. Any final words on relationship building for the future? What can the audience gain from some of your final words as they look to, make an impact on others' lives and, really forge ahead in this new generation of challenges and expectations and everything that's going on in the world today, to be a better relationship builder for themselves, for their families, for their organizations, and whomever they cross paths with?
Well, I mean, that's a lot, but the one thing I would say is that it's important to extend a hand. It's important to step out and to, generate the opportunity for relationship building. And the idea is, again, to associate yourselves with people who are principle based, who are ethically sound, and, who look to have positive impact and positive change. People who are optimistic. All of those things reflect who you are, and ultimately will help build you into, folks who are similarly situated. And I think it's extremely important. If you're going to choose who you're associated with, you use that basis, as I said, principle and ethics, use that basis to make your choices as to with whom you want to be associated. And if you do that, then you're able to choose wisely.
Thank you so much, Len, for your time. I really appreciate it. And I wish you well always. God bless, and look forward to staying in touch. And thank you again for being a part of my podcast today. I loved our interview.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.